Boy, that was a nail biter last night. And I'm not talking about the storm. I'm talking about the Bucks at the Chiefs. we were we were sweating bullets there at the end, weren't we? Mahomes finds a way to win. He is an incredible player. He is a singular player. Nobody like him. Except, I've said this before, and now Fran himself is saying it. Fran Tarkenton, in his 80s, he came out and said, I look at old films of me, and I'm doing the same stuff. Well, you were, Fran. And when Mahomes came out, I was telling all my friends, I said, he's just like Fran Tarkenton. Talking about Mahomes. Incredible things he could do with the football. But you see, Fran, you didn't have Kelsey, and you didn't have that incredible offensive line. Uh, you got to the Super Bowl 4 times, I think, and you did it, half of it on your back, looking up at the sky because you were sacked. So anyway, yes, it takes more than one man to make a team. I don't care how good you are. Mahomes proved it last night. He was weakened, his leg was hurting, but he did what he had to do to win. His teammates helped him do that. I bring that up to say that nobody is indispensable. You know, in business, we have a thing called key man insurance. It's like the key man on a project, you would take out an extra policy on him. In case he died, it would cover the losses for whatever project he was working on. If you've been in business for any amount of time at all, you've probably either been the subject of or the or the purchaser of a key man insurance policy. But you see, that doesn't exist in the ministry of the gospel. Because God calls men and women individually to the field. And then he sets the work before us. And it is ours to do it, not somebody else's. And how we do it will be judged as servants at the Bema seat of Christ. Will be judged for our service. Charlene, good morning. It's very good to see you. But it is a humbling thing when you realize that nobody's indispensable. We're all a team. I'm on a team with the people at Wheelerville Community Church and Victory Baptist Church and Galena First Baptist Church and the Ozark Full Gospel Church and the Cedar Valley Community Church down in Hollister. And those are just the immediate people that I work with. I'm on a team with our homeless ministry. I'm on a team with most of the churches where Ron and I travel and where I travel by myself during the year. Remember the thing that led to Barnabas and Paul splitting up in the end of Acts 15, as Paul said, hey, let us go check out all the churches and see how they're doing. That's what I do. I check out the churches and see how they're doing. I am working in a field that was planted by others. Good morning, Kevin. God bless you. I'm reaping a harvest from what I didn't plant and what I didn't tend. But sometimes when we go to these churches, we don't reap at all. We continue to water. We continue to hoe. We continue to weed. We continue to nurture and care. Especially pastors. These godly men who are sitting over sometimes anywhere from a half a dozen people up to 500 people. So many times, pastors in these small to middle sized churches, they don't have anybody they can talk to, and that's part of our ministry. But nobody does it alone. See, the challenge is to not worry about what anybody else is doing. Just do what God puts in front of you to do. Now, I've said all that to say this because I am humbled daily by God, this worm such as I, this sinner. The only reason I'm not going to hell is because Jesus saved me, and that's nothing that I can brag on because I didn't do it. He did. And that in my flesh there dwelleth no good thing. I am not special. I don't see myself as special. I know God doesn't. Because he knows me too well. And my wife, she's not all that impressed either. After 44 years of doing the trip with me, she already knows what's going on. But you see, nobody is indispensable. The team is everyone God has called. And so in that sense, whoever is watching this morning is my yoke fellow. We're partnered whether we know it or not. And that humility of being a part of something very large, a small part, a very small part of something very large, the work of the Lord Jesus Christ in a field that is ripe unto harvest. I'm humbled again this morning because a good brother, actually two people, messaged me this morning and said, will there be a lesson this morning? Now, I got up late and because I didn't sleep hardly at all because of the storms. When the storms finally calmed down around midnight or so, I went to bed. But I always like to stay up with my pants on in case a tree falls on the house or something. I just can't rest when the storm is raging. And so I was up and I didn't sleep much. But I get up this morning and I'm just lazing around a little bit. Took a while to wash my face and comb my hair, or comb my face and wash my hair. I don't remember what I did. Sometimes you get them confused, But the idea that somebody is waiting for me to come on here because it's become a part of their world. This little program has become a part of their study of God's Word. That is a humbling and even horrifying thought, because what damage do I do to somebody who's counting on this program and then I don't do it? But like if I were dead and somebody, or if I ran off with a piano player and became an outcast, couldn't do this anymore, well, somebody else would do it. God would put somebody else. It's always next man up. Always next man up. Nobody is indispensable. And everybody's weeping about these great men down in Texas, that have fallen and thrown out of their churches and thrown out of their ministries for doing the hokey pokey with some 20-year-old, after they've been preaching to us for 50 years to don't ever do that. That's how it works. Satan attacks you where you're strong, baby. Uriah was one of David's mighty men. Uriah should have been safe. But that's where Satan got David. Not where he was weak, but where he was strong. His loyalty to his mighty men. Uriah the Hittite was one of the 30 David's mighty men. Was with him in the cave. Was with him in the wilderness. Was with him at Ziklag. Was with him all the way. But that didn't keep David from stealing Bathsheba and having Uriah killed. Satan attacks you in the strong point. Good morning, Miss Amy. God bless you, daughter. You're growing into a fine Bible teacher. I was very pleased to see you Sunday morning in all your glory. You see, we got an idea in our churches today that Sunday school is someplace where you go and you eat donuts and drink coffee and talk about fishing or hunting. Good morning, Trent. And you talk about fishing or hunting or whatever for about an hour, and then for 3 minutes read a Bible verse. Either that or you read out of the quarterly. Well, if you just read out of the quarterly, you don't have any need to have a teacher. You can just read the quarterly like if it was an issue of the daily bread or something. Our daily bread. I'm not saying it's not profitable, but it's just not the same as teaching. What Amy did is she prepared a lesson and she taught. And she took questions at the end. In my opinion, that's what Sunday school ought to be. God raises up also teachers. Now, all your cessationists and Calvinists, Reformed theologians, Covenant theologians, New American Apostolic, New Apostolic Reformation, all of these new people, these with this Reformed idea and all this stuff, they don't believe in that. It's like don't even really believe that Sunday school is necessary, but Sunday school is something that needs to be taught. And the reason it fills a big gap is because my denomination dropped the only really good teaching program it had, and that was training union. They probably dropped it 20, 30 years ago. I'm sure they dropped it because it was working, because when I started preaching in the Missouri Baptist Convention, there were 2,200 Southern Baptist churches in Missouri. Now there's 1,600. So I'm sure that we're doing everything right. So, but anyway, I appreciated Amy because she taught. She prepared the lesson. She was ready. She was thorough, and she taught the material. And I think we need to look at Sunday school as school. We're there to learn. Or if you're a night owl, you could say, well, that's the hour where I drink coffee and wake up. And at some point during the Sunday school class, you'll start hearing words instead of wah, 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 and all of a sudden it'll turn into the glory of God. But, each man in his own stride. I am grateful for teachers, but all Reformed theologians don't believe that the teacher is a separate ascension gift. They believe pastor and teacher are one gift. Well, that ain't what it says. And I'm sure you can find some Greek scholar that'll say something else, but then it all depends on which guy in a tie you want to believe. I will tell you this, that there were 5 ascension gifts, not 4. And what the cessationist does, they'll say, well, the pastor role is the only one that's functioning today. Apostle, prophet, evangelist, and even teacher, they're not in for today because the pastor is the teacher. So they lump it all in there together. Good morning, Margaret. They do that so it will make them more comfortable about saying there's no such thing as a prophet or an evangelist or something, you see. Well, see, they're wrong. And when you're wrong, you have to make up things to defend your position. They believe pastor teacher is one gift. I can prove it just by deduction that it's not one gift. All pastors are teachers, because you cannot devote your life to prayer and the ministry of the word. Good morning, Lee. You cannot devote yourself to prayer and the ministry of the word, which the apostles say in chapter 6 of Acts is your primary duty, pastor. Prayer and the ministry of the word. That's it. And that's why God gives you other people in your flock, is so they can do all the other stuff. Your job is prayer and the ministry of the word. Period. That's it. Now, I'm a realist, and I know we all wind up doing all kinds of other things, but that's what the Bible, that's the orders we have from the scripture. All pastors are teachers. However, all teachers are not pastors. Either they're not qualified to be pastors, or God did not give them the gift to be a pastor, or God did not call them to the office of pastor. But all pastors are teachers, not all teachers are pastors. So the gift of pastor, teacher does not exist. There are two separate gifts, pastor and teacher. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11. If you don't believe me, read it for yourself. So I'm humbled and overwhelmed that anybody would miss me if I wasn't on the air. But it does beg the question. I'm old, and at the moment, I am not in remission, but I'm maintaining. And the doc says that something else will probably kill me before the cancer does. I hope he's right. And so whether the sickness gets me or not, or whether Jesus comes, of course, if Jesus comes, none of it's going to matter, because you're going to be with him if you're saved. And I believe you are. You wouldn't be watching this program. He'll either come for me or I'll go to him. Brother Trent preached that the other night. Either he'll come for me or I'll go to him. The point is I'm a lot closer to the end than I am the beginning. And when I am gone, God will raise up somebody else to do this. Maybe it's one of you. Maybe one of you will take the idea that old Jimmy Harris, good morning, Cheryl, that old Jimmy Harris is, oh, Rhonda, yeah, I just kind of quit a couple of years ago, didn't I? Yeah, well, I've explained that before. I did go a couple of years without doing the morning program, and then I got real organized after that and became dedicated to it. It was kind of touch and go for a period. I did it during COVID, and then I didn't do it for a year or two, and then I just bowed out. And I have many excuses for that. My head hurt too bad. I had trouble seeing. I was having a lot of trouble with retention and reading and planning my lessons, but God showed me another way to plan. And it involves not writing anything down. It involves listening to the scriptures over and over and over again, and checking my references and listening to them, because for some reason I can't read and retain as well as I used to. I blame it on the brain surgery, because it's been getting worse ever since 2018, this short-term memory loss that I have. But God assured me that everything I knew before 2018 I still know, and he showed me how to find it in my head. He gave me different tools to deal with it. So part of it was an actual physical disability, Rhonda, of the reason that I abandoned this for a couple of years in the morning. The other reason is I think I was probably lazy and feeling sorry for myself, and why has God done this to me? And how come he slowed me down? And why did he clip my wings? And why are things like this? And why does it take so much effort and maintenance for me to get around and do things? And then I started thinking, I'd look at wheelchair Rick and I said, well, at least I'm not in a wheelchair. And then I'd look at another friend of mine that's only got one leg. And I said, well, at least I got both my legs. They don't work all that great, but I got both of them. You see, God took me. I put myself in the wilderness for a little while and God pulled me out. And it was wallowing in self-pity. It started out with being ill and having a disease. and then I took the facts and I stretched them out to an old, poor, pitiful me thing. You know, I'll just go out in the garden and eat worms. Nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. We are all susceptible to self-pity because we are all flesh. And when things don't go our way or the way we think they ought to go, we can get upset. So, Rhonda, my 2-year absence from teaching, I was still preaching in our churches and not teaching in the morning. And my 2-year absence started out as a health problem and quickly became a self-pity problem. You know, I don't think that, you know, I bet you Jack Hibbs is not on his TV show, or Greg Glory. I bet they're not admitting their failures to the world when we should be studying chapter 8 of Zechariah. You know, I have managed to talk for 20 minutes about being humble. Now, how humble could I actually be if I talked for 20 minutes about myself? I just wanted you to know that I'm grateful to you for watching. I'm grateful when I get people ask me questions about what did I mean about this or that, because that means you're listening. That means you're thinking. And so anyway, we're going to start chapter 8 today of Zechariah. Again, the word of the Lord of hosts came to me, saying, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I was jealous for Zion with a great jealousy, and I was jealous for her with a great fury. What does this mean? It means Rhonda, we love you. And it is that kind of encouragement that you give me and many other people that watch this little program that keep me going. It just keeps me going. I want to be a help to people. I don't want to be a hindrance. Remember, Zechariah is urging them to finish the rebuilding of the temple. That is his job, to get the people in charge to finish rebuilding the temple. And this does happen following his ministry under the rule of Zerubbabel, who was of the royal seed of David. And again, the word of the Lord of hosts came unto me and said, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I am jealous for Zion with a great jealousy, and I was jealous for her with great fury. Now this, of course, happened. The jealousy comes in two deals. First, he comes jealous because they're worshiping other gods, and they're whoring after other gods, which is spiritual adultery. This happened in Israel. It happened in Judah. Right now, he's talking about Judah specifically, because what is Zion? Zion is Israel. Remember, Zion is Jerusalem. Remember, we spent a whole day talking about that last week. That's what Zion is. It was the fort, the tower on top of Mount Moriah, which became the Temple Mount. And it was the tower that the Jebusites had built, and they called it Zion. And that's what he took away. That's what he took away. And that's why they called it Zion. Jerusalem is Zion. Zion is Jerusalem. No matter what they say, these political people say today. I was jealous for Zion with a great jealousy. Of course, now the first reason that he was jealous was because they'd gone a whoring after other gods. In chapter 2 of Joel, and he is calling the people to repentance in Joel. Joel was written 400 years roughly before Zechariah writes. And he says, blow a trumpet, verse 15 of chapter 2 of Joel. And we did an in-depth study of Joel 2 or 3 months ago. It's archived in YouTube too. Good morning, Gayla. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly. Gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children and those that suck the breast. That means everybody. Bring them all to church. Let the bridegroom go forth of his chamber and the bride out of her closet. Let the priests, the ministers of the Lord, weep before the porch and the altar. Let them say, spare thy people, O Lord, and give not thine heritage to reproach, that the heathen should rule over them. Wherefore should they say among the people, where is their God? And he talks about them being invaded. That's going to happen in the future. He's also talking about them being invaded by these locusts that were there at the time that destroyed their crops. And the people came and were begging God for food and repenting of their sins and asking God to lift this curse. And then in verse 18, then will the Lord be jealous for his land and pity his people. He was jealous because they turned to other gods. They worshiped the gods of the Zidonians and the abomination of the Midianites, Chemosh, and the Moabites, Ashtoreth, and then Dagon, the god of the Philistines, but mostly Baal, Molech. You see, he was jealous because they worshiped other gods. We see in the book of Hosea where God requires Hosea to marry a whore so he will know what it felt like to be cheated on, to be hated, and to have to keep caring her and for her and loving her and trying to save her from her whoredom. The way it's what God does. With Israel, he's saying, I love you. I've loved you with an everlasting love. Where is that in Jeremiah? It ought to be Jeremiah 30, maybe. Jeremiah 30. Jeremiah 31. Yes, it's in the chapter about the new covenant. And at the same time, Jeremiah says, he's talking about the return from the captivity. And he's even talking beyond that to the millennium. In verse 1 it says, at the same time, saith the Lord, will I be the God of all the families of Israel. When Jeremiah wrote this, Israel, the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, had been in captivity for 140 years. The Assyrians took them captive. Then, of course, the Babylonians conquered the Assyrians, and they became rulers. I will be their God. All the families of Israel, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Good morning, Charlie. Thus saith the Lord, the people which were left of the sword found grace in the wilderness, even Israel, when I went to cause him to rest. The Lord hath appeared of old unto me, saying, yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. This is symbolic of Israel, Jacob saying that God appeared of old unto me, where God appeared to him on where was he? Gilead, Mount Gilead, where he set up it was at Bethel, but it's where he set up the table, the pillar that he'd used for a pillow, and swore to God that he would serve him if he brought him back to his father's house. And said, the Lord appeared of old unto me, saying, Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness have I drawn thee. He is jealous for us with a godly jealousy. He is jealous when we go after other gods and turn aside as an adulterous woman. As an unfaithful wife. But he never stops loving. And when he becomes jealous for her, he becomes jealous in the sense that he's not going to let anybody do anything to her. In Hosea, he sends Hosea to buy back Gomer because she had sold herself, her whoredoms had sold herself into slavery. She belonged to somebody, and he went and bought her back and took her home. You see, that's what God did for you and me on Calvary. He sent his only son, only begotten son, Jesus Christ. And he died on a cross because God loved you and he loved me. And he was going to buy us back from our slave owner, who was the devil. We love you, Rhonda. You're so kind to us. Hello, Linda. My sister-in-law's there too. Linda, good to see you. Rhonda, I would mention that not this weekend, but the next weekend, if you want to tell any of the crew, we're going to be at Mount Gibson, there at Waynesville, at Richard Breeden's church. We're going to be at Mount Gibson Friday and Saturday, and Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday morning. I'm not sure about Sunday night. The 15th, 16th, and 17th of this month of November, we will be with Brother Richard there at Mount Gibson. That's still 40 miles from your house, but if you have to come to town for any reason on Friday or Saturday night, you could just make a stop at the church. You never know when you might have to go to Waynesville or St. Robert, right? Also in Zechariah, God talks about this jealousy to the people when they have gone astray and when he calls them back. Now, verse 1 of this book of Zechariah, when he's saying what needs to happen, and he's saying in verse 14 of Zechariah, when he's lining out his mission, that God said to rebuild the temple. And so the angel are finished rebuilding the temple. All right, what a deal. That's wonderful, Rhonda. Glad y'all could make some of it. I know you got grandkids and all that stuff that's in every kind of team there is, and I know they're successful at it. And so the angel that communed with me said unto me, Cry thou, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I am jealous for Jerusalem and for Zion with a great jealousy. In other words, God is saying, you belong to me. You may not act like you belong to me, but you still belong to me. And I am going to love you. I'm going to care for you. I'm going to do everything I can to restore you. And it says, and I was jealous for her with a great fury. So he had them go into captivity. During, we studied Jeremiah. We know about the fall of Jerusalem. the same book where God says, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. But he still had Nebuchadnezzar come and destroy them and carry the best of them, the rich people, all the ruling class, carry them into captivity. Now he's jealous for them in a different way. Now that their punishment is over after 70 years, he causes a heathen king, the king of Persia, to send them back to Jerusalem under Ezra to rebuild the temple. He, later, under another Persian king, he sends Nehemiah back to rebuild the walls and to replace the gates that had burned down. And during that time period, that initial time period, Ezra's group had built an altar and reinstituted temple worship. And it took him 2 or 3 years to go through the priesthood to get actual Levites who were qualified to be in the priesthood. Yeah, I don't want to point this out to you, but everybody who's qualified, everybody, who wants to be a priest was not qualified to be a priest. You had to be not only of the tribe of Levi, but you had to be of the seed of Aaron to be a priest. As I understand that could come. Some of the Jewish scholars tell me that could have come if your mother was the daughter of a priest. Then if your husband was another Levite, but he wasn't a priest, it was still possible for you to serve in some area of the priesthood. But it depended on what your course was and what her father's course was. But it was all in the bloodline. And the blood, they had married many strange wives during that 70 years of captivity, and so they had to weed them out. The same thing happens today in our churches. There are people who want to be pastors who are not qualified to be pastors. And I don't want to get into the qualifications. My qualifications are not nearly as stiff as the Lord's, and the Lord's can decide what he wants to do. And some of the rules we beat up each other over the head with, I'm not sure it says that. But I'm not going to get in that today. But there are men and women who want to be pastors who are not qualified to be pastors. And I do believe that there are guidelines in the New Testament that Paul gives in 1 Timothy and in Titus. But also it is God who calls the person. See, without the call, it doesn't matter what your qualifications are. There are people in hell right now who have absolutely correct doctrine. Did you know that the Pharisees who killed Jesus, they had perfect doctrine? They're all in hell, or most of them are. We know that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea are not. But we're pretty sure Caiaphas is, and Annas, and all that other gang that murdered the Lord, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who nailed him to a tree and bled him dry. They're in hell. So the Lord becomes jealous, and he wants to restore the land. He sent Ezra to get through, to reestablish the priesthood. He built the altar. It's as far as he got. Then Nehemiah came. They're doing this great building program. So they actually finally start building. He's rebuilding the walls. He rebuilt the gates. He made the city secure. But all they build is the foundation of the temple. And then they kind of slack off. They just kind of quit working on it. I mean, they're able to go to the altar and sacrifice. If it's raining, they just stand in the rain, as they did one day, all day long, to hear the word of God. Because they're outside, they build this big pulpit, this high stand of wood, and Nehemiah's up there as one of the guests, but Ezra stands up there and preaches and teaches. That's where we get the idea of a pulpit from, a pulpit of wood. I'm a heretic when I was at Galena because I had a plastic plexiglass pulpit that was shorter, because if you look at my profile picture on Facebook, I look like I'm that guy on a Home Improvement. You know, all you ever see is the top of his head, Wilson. But I look like I was trying to crawl out from behind the pulpit. So we got this little bitty pulpit that I could just kind of stand there and I could see over without standing on my tiptoes. I'm not very tall. As those of you who see me in person can attest. My point is once they got the foundation laid and they got the city secure, they went off to commerce. They're reestablishing commerce. There's so much business going on that Nehemiah has to threaten to kill people if they come around the gates on the Sabbath, and he starts closing the gates on the Sabbath so he can stop business because it's against the law of God. Short pockets, yeah, that's what Pastor Akins calls me, short pockets. I've had a lot of nicknames, but that was a new one. I remember back in the 70s, I was the bionic stump. You know, that was the $6 million man, the bionic man. I was the bionic stump. But anyway, they got into commerce, they got into business, and they left off of the building of the temple. And now, roughly 20 years have passed since Cyrus first sent them back to rebuild the temple, and it's not rebuilt. You know, and part of the preaching of Haggai and Zechariah, God sends them to urge the people to finish building the temple. Because look at it this way. If the king of Persia sends you, who's ruling the world at the time, and will for the next 200 years until Alexander the Great, the king of the world says, go and build your temple. God has told me to send you to build a temple to your God in Jerusalem. And they go, what do you think happens to those people if they don't build the temple? I mean, nothing spiritual is going to happen to them. The king's going to come and put them out of business. Might kill them, might send them back to Babylon in chains because they didn't obey. But even greater than that is they've disobeyed God. They have disobeyed the voice of God, because Isaiah wrote that after 70 years, Isaiah wrote that Cyrus would be raised up. And then Jeremiah wrote that the time period that they were going to be in Babylon was 70 years. And so when God finally gave them the opportunity to go back and rebuild the temple, they should have got it done immediately. But they let the obstacles and problems of this world get in their way. Yeah, they had trouble with the qualifying priest. Yeah, they had trouble getting things, but they had trouble with the weather. They had trouble with this. They had trouble with people attacking them. So they had to rebuild the walls. They had trouble with people coming in whenever they wanted to and not having any law and order, having confusion in the streets, and having other business people come in and steal business away from the Jews who were scratching to make a living. Yeah, I know they had problems. But after nearly 20 years, the men sent to fix the problem had not done it. And what made it worse is all the rich people and the ruling class, they were building houses. They were bringing in timbers from Lebanon and sealing those houses, which they had wood roofs, ceilings. They were building themselves nice houses and palaces and eating high on the hog, but they had not finished building the temple of the Lord. That is the mission of Haggai and Zechariah, to get them to keep building the temple, to get them to start again and to finish it. And so God was jealous when they went off away from him. And then he was jealous because he loved them. He took them back, just like Hosea went and bought back Gomer from her enslavers. Verse 3, so thus saith the Lord, I am returned unto Zion. Now, what he's saying in this first passage is, I am here with you. We'll go back to chapter 1 of Zechariah. That's one of the first things that Zechariah says to the people in his message from God. he says that he says, verse 15, he says, I am very sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease, for I was but a little displeased, and they helped toward that affliction. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, I am returned to Jerusalem with mercies. I came back to bless you. I brought you back here so I could bless you in this land. My house shall be built in it. That was the original order. And here we are 20 years later. That's why God is sending Zechariah. Saith the Lord of hosts, and a line shall be stretched forth upon Jerusalem. Now, what he says here again, where he says, I am returned to Jerusalem. And he says, I am returned to Zion and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. And he did. And he says something that happened in spirit, but it has not happened in reality because it has never happened yet. And Jerusalem shall be called a city of truth. And the mountain of the Lord, the hosts, mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. We're talking about the millennial kingdom here. We're not talking about Zerubbabel's temple. We're not talking about before Zerubbabel's temple was built after the return from Babylon or during. And how do I know this? We go back to Isaiah chapter 1. You see, so much of this stuff has a short or near-term fulfillment, but the ultimate fulfillment happens either during the last days or during the millennial kingdom. So we're always looking at this. Well, during Isaiah's time, we'll go back and we'll begin with a familiar passage. And then go right into what I was going to talk about. Wash you, verse 16, chapter 1, Isaiah. Wash you, make you clean. Put away the evil of your doings from before mine eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do well. Seek judgment. Relieve the oppressed. Judge the fatherless. Plead for the widow. You know, that was a big deal in the previous chapters in Zechariah we were talking about for several days. Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. If ye be willing and obedient, ye shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, ye shall be devoured with the sword. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. And then in verse 21, he says, how is the faithful city become a harlot? It was full of judgment. Righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. And then the return, when God says, I'm returned to Jerusalem, that it should be called a city of truth. That's part of this restoration. Now, there's a temporary and an immediate restoration of that when they get the temple built, and they have a time there. But, and I'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow. It occurs to me that after Zechariah, there's only one more writer. And he is complaining because the people have left off of the service of God's house. They're not tithing the way they should. They're not supporting the work of the Lord the way they should. They're not living out righteousness the way they should. So we know that this is not a permanent situation where it says, and the Jerusalem shall be called a city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. Its ultimate fulfillment of this is in the millennium, in the millennial kingdom of Christ. That is when he will sit on the throne of his father David, and he'll rule with a rod of iron, and the law shall go forth from Mount Zion. Verse 21 of Isaiah 1, how is the faithful city become a harlot? It was full of judgment, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. And he's very dismayed. He says, the silver has become dross, thy wine mixed with water. They're watering the whiskey. Thy princes are rebellious and companions of thieves. Everyone loveth gifts and followeth after rewards. They judge not the fatherless, neither doth the cause of the widow come unto them. Yeah, I always have trouble with people who are spend more time raising money than they do performing their ministry. And that's usually a telltale sign of crooks. It means they're crooked. Lord don't need your money. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He'll direct you to give his money to his work, but he does that to make you a part of his work and of his service. He doesn't do it because he needs it. Be careful who you give your money to. Therefore saith the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, I will ease me of mine adversaries and avenge me of my enemies, and I will turn my hand upon thee and purely purge away thy dross and take away all thy tin. Otherwise, I want to make you pure. You'll be pure silver, because the dross is the tin when you refine the silver. I'm going to make you righteous whether you want it or not. That hasn't happened yet. And then here it comes. Verse 26, I will restore thy judges at the first, and thy counselors as at the beginning. Afterward thou shalt be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. Zion shall be redeemed with judgment, and her converts with righteousness. That didn't happen then, and it hadn't happened yet. It will happen during the kingdom on earth of our Lord Jesus Christ, where all those who are bought by him and belong to him and trust in him and him alone, where we will rule with him as kings and priests for 1,000 years, and then spend eternity with him in that eternal state, in the new heaven and the new earth described in Revelation 21 and 22. Well, that's as far as I got today, because I spent the first 20 minutes talking about me and how humble I am. Don't you see how it is a tricky thing? My friend, Dr. Barley, the plumber, a very interesting man. He has 2 master's degrees and an earned PhD from Mid-American Seminary there in outside of Memphis. And on the Tennessee side, on the east of Memphis there, where Adrian used to be the president. Matter of fact, it was the seminary that Adrian built, Adrian Rogers. And he just didn't like being a pastor, didn't feel God had called him to be a pastor. He was a teacher, but he was also a plumber. And he became a master plumber. And so I call him Dr. Barley, the plumber. He says that humility is really tricky. If you think you're humble, you probably ain't. And I'm going to leave you with that today. We'll pick up in chapter 8 of Zechariah tomorrow. God bless you.